Mr. President, last week I chaired a hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Subcommittee on Africa and Global Health, focusing on Zimbabwe. As a young man, I fell in love with the continent of Africa, and specifically with the country of Zimbabwe, where I served part of my Mormon mission. The year was 1983, and the country had recently gained its independence. A man by the name of Robert Mugabe was serving as prime minister at the time. I don't think anyone could have predicted back then that Mugabe would serve as leader of Zimbabwe until November of 2017. Nor could anyone have imagined the damage that he would do to this beautiful country. Jubilation erupted on the streets in Harare in November of 2017 when Zimbabweans heard that Mugabe had been ousted by his own party and forced to retire. The people of Zimbabwe burst into spontaneous celebration, hoping that Mugabe, with him finally removed from power, the country might begin to move forward after nearly 40 years of his reign. I had the opportunity to visit Zimbabwe in February 2016, where I led a delegation to Southern Africa. Mugabe's misrule of the country was certainly evident at that time. The devastation had taken its toll on the capital city of Harare. Yet somehow the people of Zimbabwe, so capable, so resilient, had persevered and were looking for a brighter future. I was able at that time to reconnect with friends who I hadn't seen for 30 years, including one of my missionary companions, Peter Chaya, who despite severe physical disability brought on by polio as a child, managed to raise 4 children and contribute a great deal to his church, to his community, and to his country. Zimbabwe's greatest potential has always been with its people, and it's time for the government to take steps to ensure that this potential can finally be realized. I want to work with Zimbabwe to make this happen, and that's why I introduced the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Amendment Act along with Senator Coons last March. Senator Coons has been a valued partner in efforts to bring better governance to Zimbabwe and ensure that we play a constructive role. The Zadera Amendments Act, signed into law in August, reiterates that in order for sanctions on Zimbabwe to be lifted, the government must restore the rule of law, it must have free and fair elections, and it must demonstrate a sincere commitment to land reform. But, and this is different from the prior statute, our changes send a signal to the government of Zimbabwe, to the opposition, and to the Zimbabwean people that the United States is interested in improving the state of our bilateral relationship, including in the areas of trade and investment. The bill asks that the government of Zimbabwe take concrete, tangible steps toward good governance and the enactment of economic reforms. It asks that all statutes inconsistent with Zimbabwe's 2013 Constitution are either replaced or amended to bring them in line with that Constitution. And finally, it underlines the need for robust civil society that's allowed to function freely without government interference. The conditions outlined in the Zadera Amendment Act are reasonable and will not take too long to achieve. I urge President Mnangagwa to move ahead and repeal troublesome statutes and engage in meaningful economic reform along the lines of what Finance Minister Nube has already recommended. I remain concerned that the lack of momentum for reform in Zimbabwe will squander the opportunity presented by the former president's ouster. We can't expect Zimbabwe to flip a switch and reverse nearly 4 decades of misrule in a few months' time, but we should expect more urgency to reform the economy and expand political space for the opposition. There is no more outward sign that Zimbabwe has yet to turn the page than the government leveling charges against opposition figures like Tendai Biti and others. There's no purpose served by going after one's political opponents, especially in the wake of a contested election. The new government of Zimbabwe bears much of the responsibility for forging a positive path forward, but the opposition party needs to play a constructive role there as well. The leader of the Movement for Democratic Change, Nelson Chamisa, is young and capable. He has a long career ahead of him. It would be to his benefit and to the benefit of all Zimbabweans to recognize the legitimacy of the new government and to help create an inclusive process moving ahead. As in any democracy, Zimbabwe needs a loyal opposition in the form of an opposition party or parties to hold the government accountable within the framework of the rule of law. There will be new elections to contest, more chances to make the case to voters. Now is the time to unify the country. During these past few months, I've thought often about my friends like Peter Chaya and others in Zimbabwe who I know deserve far better from their government than they have received in the past 4 decades. They deserve a government that represents them, a government that provides an environment that allows them to follow their dreams and to realize the dreams of their children. Zimbabwe deserves a government worthy of its people, and I would encourage my colleagues to look for ways to engage constructively with Zimbabwe's new government moving ahead. The new Zadera presents a good, worthy framework. By next month, my role will change, but I will remain involved, and I will be still committed to a strong partnership between the United States and Zimbabwe. I yield the floor.